Did you feel more pressure as a programmer and those ratings coming down that we were just talking about that causes so much anxiety, or as a business person, entrepreneurial, making sure that, especially when you are in the early days, you're not quite sure where your next client's going to come from or if you can pay your rent or your employees? What was more stressful?
Ratings. Notice how long I had to think about that.
Benztown president Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My next guest was inducted into the Michigan Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 2005. He received the prestigious Rockwell Award from the Conclave in 2012. He was Radio Inc.'s Luminary Award in 2011, an Outstanding Alumni Award from Michigan State University's College of Communication Arts that same year, and he was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame in 2018. I was actually there and got to watch him get inducted, which was really special and a phenomenal experience. Please welcome the founder and president of Jacobs Media, Fred Jacobs. Fred, thank you so much for joining, man. It is an absolute honor to have you here.
Well, I've wanted to do this for a long time, as you know. I definitely pimp myself in Twitter and everything. I mean, once I saw you talk to Lori Lewis, I'm thinking, hey, you know what? I've got to get a part of this. No, I'm seriously honored to do this. I've always wanted to sit down and talk with you anyway. Every time we run into each other at a conference or convention, it's, hey, gotta go. Good to see you. Be well and all that. So, yeah, and I know you were there that night, and you sent me a lovely bottle of champagne, which was really classy and really sweet. So thank you. It's great to be here.
Man, you've been so kind to us over the years, and you know I just turned a little over a decade old, Benztown, but you've been so supportive when you are doing your tech surveys, and you've come on after us or before us at the All Access Audio Summit. Now you've always say something very nice about us, and via social media, you've said nice tweets and nice posts, and thank you, man. That means so much. That is, we were just talking baseball, both Fred, myself, and Kevin, who's the producer of the show, are big baseball fans, and you really are just a complete class act. It doesn't get much more classy than you. I would, in my world, I grew up listening to Vin Scully. He's the gold standard of sports broadcasters, and you are the gold standard, the Vin Scully of programmers and consultants, and it just means so much to have you on today.
I'll take that. I mean, you know, when I started consulting, the image for consultants wasn't exactly sterling. And I never had a consultant as a program director. I wouldn't have one of those guys. And so when I actually started out, I didn't have any real path or plan about how this whole thing was going to go. I just wanted to do good work for people and provide some value. So I'm glad it's worked out. But thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate that.
Of course, and I mean them. This industry, and I think there are some really great people, and sometimes there's some people that just don't treat other people well, and you've just always treated people, I think, incredibly well. And I've gotten to meet Vin Scully a couple times, and he is exactly who he is off the air, on the air, and he just is an authentic, genuine person, and I feel the exact same way about you.
Well, I was raised well. You know, I'm one of those guys that has absolutely no excuse for screwing up my life and not being able to blame it on parents. You know, I mean, so many other people can look back and go, well, I mean, you know, considering how I was raised, it's amazing I'm not in jail. But in my case, I was raised so well with the right values and the right opportunities. And I mean, my father never even questioned when I went into radio, which kind of puts me in a...
That's unusual in and of itself.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about growing up.
So, you know, my two brothers are in the business with me, which is the other odd part of the whole thing. But we grew up in Detroit. Typical Midwest values, and Dad was a paper and plastic sales guy. Salt of the earth, you know, one of those guys, did not graduate from college himself, wanted to make sure we all did. But when it came to the career thing, it was, hey, you know what? Whatever you do something that you love, as long as you can make a living at it. There was always that clause at the end of it, as long as you can make a living at it. But yeah, I think in his life, he wasn't always in the jobs that he dreamed of doing. And I think he looked at us and said, you know what, whatever you do something that you enjoy. And so for me, and I came to radio sort of late in the game. Most people in radio knew when they were 8 that they wanted to do this. And I didn't know until after I got my bachelor's degree that I would end up here. So it took me a while to figure it out. But, yeah, that's the deal. Grew up in Detroit, huge Tigers fan, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Your guy was Vin Scully. Mine was Ernie Harwell. Same deal. Same class act, all that stuff. And college in Michigan all the way, a few jobs around the country. But I moved back to Detroit to program Riff in the early 80s, and I've been there ever since. And I married a Detroit girl, so I'm as good as stuck.
Detroit through and through. So are you the oldest of the 3 brothers?
Yeah.
And were you the first to fall in love with radio in college?
Exactly. And then Paul came after me. He's 3.5 years my junior. He and I were at Michigan State at the same time. I was chasing a master's degree, and he was getting a bachelor's degree in advertising. I started teaching as a teaching assistant, Radio 101, essentially, and Paul had to take the class. So you can only imagine how much fun that was.
Did you guys get along pretty well as kids?
We got along reasonably well as kids, but as adults, it's just amazing how the company has developed us into best friends. And, we're great business partners, but we're each other's best friend, and it really has worked out well. And Bill's 10 years younger than me. And so, I didn't even know him, right? That's
sure.
A big age gap, right? I went away to college, he was 8.
Right.
So, yeah, but I actually hired him before I hired Paul.
No kidding.
Yeah, I needed somebody to back me up, and he was the perfect backup at that point.
So when you're in college, what was the catalyst that got you interested in radio?
It was really accidental, honestly. My undergraduate degree was sort of in a combination of American history and journalism.
Okay.
So there was a media piece there, but I really didn't want to write for a newspaper. And I always loved music and rock and roll and all that stuff. And I just didn't have the perception to be able to kind of connect the dots at that point and go, you like media, you like music, you should be in radio. But it was one of those kind of weird things where I was at a dinner party and there was a woman there who was probably 20 years older than me, a friend of my parents, and I was kind of in between colleges at that point. And, she just kind of asked me the question, what is it you really enjoy? And I'm like, well, I really enjoy music. And I kind of wandered into radio. So I went to Michigan State for a master's degree. And they looked at me and they said, you didn't take any of the right undergraduate courses, so we're going to make you take the undergraduate TV production and radio production courses. And I thought, well, cool. TV might be interesting. So I took the TV course, hated it, just hated being so dependent on so many other people in the production. And then it was time to enroll in the radio class, and I tried to talk my way out of it. And they said, no, you must do this. And like 3 days in, it was one of those instructors who was just one of those jewels, right? Maybe you can count on one hand all the really inspirational teachers or professors you have. This was one of those guys. And he just hooked me right into radio, and I fell in love and went out and bought a tape deck and an editing block, and the rest is weird history.
I love this. This is definitely different than most people's stories, which I really find fascinating. Were you a good student?
Well, yes and no. Eventually, I was a good student, but I was actually asked to leave the University of Michigan.
Why? What did you do?
I got grades that were so far below the standard because I was doing other things at the time. And so they didn't really ask me to leave. They showed me the door, and I talked myself back in. Just to give you a contrast, I averaged a 1.7 on a 4-point scale, right? That's hard to do. I averaged a 1.7 my first 2 years and a 3.8 my last 2 years. But that was kind of like one of the seminal events of my life, right? Really failing at that high level. And meanwhile, the selective service was after me. It was during the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I had a lottery number of 60. which means
holy moly,
like
that's really
you're
low.
going in. Yeah. You're either in school or you're going in. And so it was kind of high tension at the age of 20, but it was a great experience for me. I mean, we all go through adversity in our lives at one point. And for me, that inflection point came when I was 20, and it was a moment.
So now you're in this radio program and you're thriving, and this is when you're getting the 3.8 and getting the better grades because you're really into it. And what was it that you wanted to do at that point? Did you see yourself wanting to be on air or programming, or you just didn't really know yet?
I didn't know, but I quickly came to the conclusion that I probably wasn't good enough on the air to get much further than Muskegon. With all due respect to all the people working in Muskegon and smaller markets, I really wanted to be a major market radio person in one way, shape, or form, and I knew I wasn't going to get there sitting behind the mic, and my production skills were good but not stellar.
Right.
So I wasn't sure, and the only required course in the master's program was an audience research methods class, which once again I fought to try and get myself out of, and they made me take it. And the professor there, who went on to become the chairman of the department and then had a big position at the NAB, John Abel, was the guy who turned on the audience research light for me. And that's when I really understood that you become a better programmer and you become a better broadcaster when you understand what the audience wants, how they feel, what experience they're trying to get out of listening to the radio. So that was the eye-opener for me, and it also was the way that I could sort of sideways get in the radio door.
Interesting.
And so I became an audience research guy and went to work for Frank Magid in Iowa, who was the only company doing radio and TV research at that point. And I was there with, what a class. I had John Coleman was there at the time.
Wow.
Bill Moyes. It was Alan Burns. It was a stellar group of broadcasters, and I learned a ton.
So that was your first gig out of school, was doing research.
Doing research, and then a friend of mine who was working nights at Riff. I grew up listening to Riff. She was working nights at Riff. And Tom Bender, the program director, started making noise about maybe doing a research study, which back in the mid-'70s was not a real common thing for most radio stations to do. And Sheila Rushlow, said to him, "Hey, I know this guy. He's from Detroit. He's doing audience research for a living. You ought to talk to him." And Tom called, hired me. At that point, I'm running the radio research division at Magid, so I assigned myself to that particular project.
So tell me really quick before we jump into Riff, because I'm really excited to get there, but what was your day-to-day at Magid? So
I fairly quickly started running the radio and publishing divisions for the company, and so that meant working for most of our big radio and newspaper clients. So it was really cool. Here I couldn't get arrested at a radio station a couple of years earlier. And now I'm walking into KHJ, WJR, and KS95. And at Magid, we were working for Hubbard, Bonneville, RKO, ABC. It was a cream of the crop. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was really cool. I met all these amazing broadcasters, and hopefully we brought some research value to them along the way. But it was cool, and it got me into the travel zone. That was the first time I actually traveled for a living. I was on the road back then easily 2-3 days a week. That was part of the regimen of doing this. So you learn how to work on planes and hotel beds and airport lounges and all that stuff. But it was a real grind, but it was kind of like 10 years crammed into 2.
What an education. Now, when you're going to some of the KHJ, for example, you've got to be, 22, 23 years old, and here you're showing up to do research. Would sometimes the GMs and the PDs look at you going, "What are you doing here, kid?"
Probably. Probably. It kind of took me a while to get comfortable with the idea of it as well. The real moment was at WJR in Detroit. Literally, I had interviewed for a job there a couple of years earlier and didn't get it, obviously. And here I am coming back in and doing focus groups and perceptual research and laying out the recommendations of what they should do. Holy crap, right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
I know. But it was a great training ground to do what I eventually ended up doing. I mean, so many of us who graduated from Magid went on to start our own research or consulting companies because it grounded you. I mean, you got just experience you couldn't possibly get anywhere else, and pressure you couldn't get anywhere else. I mean, I remember we did a study for Rick Sklar at ABC. I mean, holy cow. I mean, just sitting in the same room with that guy was crazy. We did a study for the Associated Press. It's like, what am I doing here, right? But it was great. You learn, and if you believe in your research and you believe in your abilities, you can sit in a meeting like that and hold your own.
That's incredible. Your parents at this point pretty proud of you? Did they understand the magnitude of your position?
I think so. Sadly, my dad passed away just as I was getting going with Jacobs Media and the classic rock thing. So I think he kind of knew it was going to be okay. And my mom is 92 and a big fan. She was there that night at the Hall of Fame dinner.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. And she was the one who actually drove me up to the University of Michigan to help me talk my way back in. So
after you've been ousted for bad grades.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So your friend helps you get a gig at Riff. And what made you decide at this point you're at Magid doing incredibly well and running their, you said their publishing, research and publishing.
For radio, right? Mm-hmm.
For radio, which is a huge gig. So you rose through the ranks there really quickly. What about Riff? What made you decide at that point to kind of jump from the research side of the business into programming?
So Magid was the kind of place that, honestly, you didn't spend your whole life there unless your name was Frank Magid. And after 2 years, I had really done a lot, and it was becoming clear to me that if I didn't get online radio station experience, I would not be able to do as well as I needed to do. I just felt there was a piece missing, having not really worked in a radio station before. And so I did the study for Riff, and they loved it. And Tom came back to me and said, would you come to work for us and do this stuff all the time? And it was like a dream come true. So I took it.
And you're back in your hometown?
Back in my hometown, and the station was in the trailers at the time. Those people who know Detroit radio know that Riff, even though it was owned by ABC, was actually in a little building connected to 3 house trailers and was killing it in the mid to late 70s. I mean, it was just an amazing time. And so, yeah, I worked there for a couple of years as research director, and then they moved me to New York to do research for their owned FM stations. So it was cool. I got to work with PLJ and KLOS and LS, and, it was it was so cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's a gigantic gig. I mean, ABC, first of all, the largest, or certainly amongst the most prestigious of the 3 networks at the time. What was it like working for ABC?
Oh, it was so awesome. It was a great company. It was so much fun. We had a lot of money to work with. We had a long runway to succeed. They believed in us as programmers, which was great. And I was surrounded by some of the cream of the crop in programming. I mean, John Guerin was at LS, Larry Berger was at PLJ, Tommy Hadges was at KLOS. I mean, just being in the same room with these guys, and we would get together once a year. They would fly us out for a week before the radio show. Literally, we would spend several days together meeting, and Rick Sklar would be in and out of these meetings, pontificating about what to do, so it was all that stuff. But I mean, a genius, to be in the same room with that guy. So it was an awesome time to work for ABC. It was really cool. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Do you feel a sense of pressure once you become the national guy for ABC and you're in charge of their research? I mean, if the ratings are going south somewhere, are you getting the call? What kind of pressure did you feel?
You know what? To be honest with you, it's one of the easiest jobs I ever had. It was
really.
It was a dream. Yep, I got to come in, do my research, say my say, and go back to New York. And it was where it got pressurized was when they brought me into Program Riff. Taking over your favorite radio station when it's getting its ass kicked by the Doubleday station in town Wheels. I mean, Chachi, all I could think the entire time I programmed Riff was, don't screw it up. Get it, help get it back to where it used to be, but don't screw it up. I mean, so that was pressure.
So you're in, let's talk, I want to go there next, but let's talk really quickly about, so you're head of research, you've got all these big stations, LA, Detroit, New York. Are you living in Manhattan? Where are you at this time?
Yeah, I'm living in Manhattan. I'm living a block away from the Dakota.
Oh my gosh, what a great location.
And I'm there when Lennon is shot.
Oh my gosh.
Craziness, right? I'm watching the Monday Night Football game, and Cosell announces that Lennon has been shot. I can hear the sirens out my window. I'm on West 73rd. The Dakota's on West 72nd, same block. Right between the park and Columbus Avenue.
Yeah.
So I start calling our affiliate stations with reports. The crazy part, I mean, you can't make this up. I was fascinated by the Dakota prior to Lennon getting shot. I mean, it's just one of the most amazing buildings in Manhattan, and I started reading books about the Dakota. So when Lennon was shot, I actually knew all kinds of stuff about the history of the building and how he and Yoko got in there, and I mean, all that stuff. So it was, talk about those, everybody in radio has those days, 9/11 or whatever.
Sure.
When something happens, and that was one of my days. Yeah.
Wow, man. Do you have some of the air checks from that day?
Well, it's so weird you say that. We can't find it. It exists somewhere because Riff and CSX have played it as part of, anniversary shows and stuff. But Riff just had its 50th and they couldn't put their hands on it. And of course, I saved nothing. I'm the only former program director who doesn't have a single gold and platinum record at home. Not one. Not a single. I'm looking behind you, man, and I can see you've got them.
We do, but I like that. Are you kind of a minimalist?
Totally. Yeah, I'm not a collector. And I don't have a room with a bunch of stuff in it. It's okay.
I actually just watched a documentary on Netflix about basically how much freedom not being attached to items gives you. We carry around all these things, and I am a collector, but you end up having storage units, and you spend so much time and energy just trying to store them somewhere, preserve them, and it's actually very liberating to let them go or give them to someone else that's going to get more enjoyment out of them than you. I need to get to be more like you.
I've learned how to purge. In the case of Riff, I didn't take much with me.
Were you a big Beatles fan?
Yeah, huge.
I've loved the Beatles, and I was very young when that had happened, but I've seen, the footage and some of the air checks from that day, and just what a huge, monumental, horrific thing that, back to what you were just saying, it was a 9/11 or a JFK assassination. It was a day like that. And to be on the air, what was that feeling? It is miraculous that you knew so much about the Dakota and in the building and about them getting in. But do you remember just doing those reports, or was it kind of almost surreal?
It was surreal, but and obviously everybody in radio, I think, goes through this when they cover some kind of huge, tragic, or monumental event. I mean, I was just adrenalized and kind of in the moment. And there was, you remember in Manhattan, there were, little banks of payphones on every corner.
Sure.
And literally, I commandeered the payphone right across the street from the Dakota and sat there for a few hours making calls.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I was right there, and it was so crazy, and none of it hit me until I actually went into work that day. I took the morning off doing all this stuff and probably walked into work around 1 o'clock. And the surreal part was everybody at work was, "Hey, you doing all right? Where were you this morning?" And I'm like, I had some stuff to do. And, hey, isn't this Lennon thing awful? And they're like, yeah, it really is. Hey, so meanwhile, have you done the KLOS thing? And I'm like, wow, I mean, everybody's sort of back to business here, and I'm still reeling from this. Yeah. And I remember the Lennon thing for months just weighed on me. I mean, I just couldn't imagine somebody of his magnitude being assassinated. I mean...
Sure. I think that, along with the JFK or Bobby Kennedy's assassination or MLK Jr.'s assassination, it was I mean, horrific. And just his celebrity and what he meant to people, I could not imagine that or really kind of fathom
No,
it.
and I think we're used to, sadly, them dying in conventional ways, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right, drug overdoses and all that. You kind of hear that and you go, well, it's a shame, but it does seem to happen a lot in the business. But being shot outside your home by an overzealous fan, wow. Even today thinking about it, but yeah, that was a moment.
You had said something interesting that I hadn't even thought about, but the fact that you had to commandeer a payphone and just how hard mechanically to set that up, and you were calling into the hotlines, I assume, but it wasn't like there was a bridge line or, hey, meet me on Zoom, or you didn't even have a cell phone. You literally had to do this all from a payphone. And were people pissed at you? Did they want to get on the payphone?
I don't remember that, and there was more than one. I mean, it was one of those double payphone things.
Okay.
So there was. I do remember there was a second one, and people were. I honestly, I have no idea what was going on around me. I was staring at the building because the entrance right where it happened is right there.
Right.
I don't remember much about people around me. You know, you get so focused, and I was focused. And again, being on the air was also not my natural habitat.
Right.
So I was also thinking about eliminating the ums and ahs and the you knows. I mean, hey, I want it to sound good, right?
Before we get back to Riff, what did you like? I mean, you're young, you're living in Manhattan. What an exciting time. What was that feeling? And you're working for a network like ABC. Tell me about stepping foot in Manhattan the first time when you got that gig.
Well, I didn't want to go.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay at Riff. And Marty Greenberg, he just passed away a few months ago. Marty was the president of the owned FM stations and was the heir apparent to take over the entire radio division. And then, interestingly, had a midlife crisis and and went to Belo Broadcasting in Dallas, another story. But a big reason why I ultimately left ABC, because he was my guy.
Oh.
Yeah, that was the guy I hitched my star to, and he was like the JFK of ABC. I mean, he was a charismatic, young, handsome, dashing, brilliant, funny, warm kind of dude. Just the best boss that I've absolutely ever had. So I was going to say talked me into it, but he made me move to New York. And I didn't want to go. I obviously had been there numerous times on business, enough to know that it's not a normal place to move to.
Right.
Right. So it took me a while to adjust, but I just remember there was a beautiful spring day where I walked outside my brownstone and looked around and just thought, oh, my God, you're working for ABC Radio in New York, the coolest city in the entire world. I mean, this is the greatest thing ever. So it took a while for it to kind of sink in, but I enjoyed it a lot. It was, and it wasn't that hard, Chachi. I sold my cars, walked to work every day. It was actually, in a weird way, laid back.
Was this, I had been to the ABC back when Cumulus had bought ABC Radio Networks. I think they called it, was the Upper West Side? Was that the location?
No, it was actually at the time on 6th Avenue.
Okay.
Like 53rd and 6th. It was the ABC building at that time, 1330 Avenue of the Americas. We worked across the street at 1345. They actually outgrew the building, and so the corporate staff was across the street in what was the Burlington building. We would go back and forth between 1330 and 1345, but it was a great location, kind of right across the street from that big Hilton on 6th Avenue that's somehow still there. It was just an awesome building to be in.
Yeah, so you really were you were just a handful of blocks from your place then that was right next to the Dakota.
It was nothing. I'd walk through Central Park every day.
Oh, my gosh.
It was so cool. And again, I mean, it was pretty easy, except on the days when it poured.
But if you're going to do New York, you did it right, my friend.
I was lucky. I really was fortunate. Unfortunately, I was only there for a year.
Only a year?
Only a year.
And then you go back to Detroit.
I go back to Detroit, wheel signs on, Tom Bender leaves the station. They kind of sit down with me and go, hey, what are we going to do here in Detroit? And they had a couple of possible names, and I thought those possible names would be disastrous for the staff. I mean, everything about Riff was predicated on personalities who talked and picked out the music and did all that stuff. And here we were attacked by essentially a commercial-free station that was the equivalent of Voice Track back in the day. None of the DJs even had last names.
Really?
The joke was, hi, I'm Austin. Here's Boston on Detroit's wheels, and right. But they did an amazing job of coming in and laser focusing their station, and they cut the playlist down, and they did a great job. And Riff at the time, of course, like a lot of AORs, which is what we were back then, album-oriented rockers, we were pretty bloated, and it's just what happens with sometimes winning radio stations with big personalities and promotional commitments and all that stuff. And so I knew a couple of the names that they were thinking about bringing in, and I said, you can't do this. You'll destroy the radio station, especially one guy. And Marty turned to me and said, well, then why don't you go back and do it?
Whoa. Were you expecting that?
No.
Were you angling for that? Or
no.
you just...
I didn't want to do it. And he said, you might be the perfect person. You know the staff. You know the numbers. They like you. You understand what the station needs at this point, and you know the market. And I said, yeah, but I've never programmed a radio station before. So, I mean, let's put that in perspective. So I did it and I took it. Yeah.
That's incredible. So your first programming gig is Riff in Detroit. Now, mind you, you've had tremendous research experience and probably no one better in the country at that point, but it is different in a lot of ways.
To a great degree, Tom let me function as his assistant the 2 years that I actually worked there. So it was cool. I was in the room where it happened, as they say, for most of the decisions that Tom made. And that was great insight for me to watch him go through all the tough calls that a major market program director has to go through with talent.
Sure.
The competitive. We had great competition. I mean, we had Wheels, W4, and ABX, and Riff. I mean, 4 album rock stations, all with great assets, in most cases, except for Wheels, great personalities. But it was a really competitive environment, still is. I mean, Detroit is Detroit Rock City. So
sure. I mean,
it can support multiple rock stations, but Tom taught me everything. And so it was helpful when I went back that I had kind of shadow boxed a bit when he was there. But yeah, it was a bit of an adjustment. And by the way, not only the first station I ever programmed, but the last.
That's amazing too. And we'll get there, but let's go back. So now I'm guessing 25, 26? You can't be very old.
30, actually.
30. Okay.
Yeah, I was at Michigan State for 4 years. It took me a while to get hired.
All right. It's still ridiculously young to be programming.
Yeah, but they gave 30-year-olds gigs like that back then. I mean,
yeah.
And I wonder about that now, Chachi. I mean, we look at radio and what's it going to take for it to be more programmatically innovative. And I think part of the reason why it was that way back in the 70s is that they let young, creative idiots run radio stations, and because everybody was kind of in their 20s and early 30s back then.
No, that's an excellent point. Your fingers at that age are on the pulse of what's happening in pop culture and music, and you really know it and look at it from a different perspective than someone that isn't living it day in and day out. So you arrived into Riff. Now you're the program director. You've been anointed. And is the staff pretty I mean, you've got a legendary staff there that's been there for quite some time. Are they open to you, or are they kind of like, who is I guess you had the advantage and they knew who you were. So that was certainly an upside. But I know a lot of times staff of that stature can be kind of negative towards someone new that comes in.
No, they were great. They were warm and welcoming, and they were, I mean, just a tremendous air staff. I mean, the dream team. I had, JJ and the morning crew in the morning. I had Ken Calvert in middays, Arthur Penhallow, who at the time was already the dean of Detroit Rock Radio and Afternoon Drive. I had Karen Savelly and Steve Kostan at night, and even the overnight guy, Carl Coffey. I mean, could have been a morning guy anywhere in the market. So, it was kind of my gig to lose at that point, but they were great to me. I mean, there's the usual friction between PD and air staff. I mean, they didn't love everything that I implemented from the beginning, but I came in with a plan. I knew what I wanted to do. I literally sat on the airplane coming from New York to Detroit and sketched out 90% of it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What was the plan that you implemented?
Well, the plan was really to double down on our personalities. The company was kind of betwixt and between. They'd never been attacked by a music machine before. All of our radio stations were heavy into personalities. And so I kind of felt like, okay, let's clean it up. Let's get rid of some of the fringes here, tighten the music down a little bit. We instituted some commercial-free programming of our own. But the main thing was, the philosophy was we're more than just a jukebox. And that was to a great degree the way Wheels was being described. And so my whole thing was, we're going to be everywhere. We're going to own the streets. We're going to own every big event. We're going to own local music. We're going to do it all. And our personalities are going to be people's friends and buddies and all that stuff. And so I just figured, hey, we've come this far. Let's execute it well and see what happens.
How long did it take you to claim your position again?
3 books.
That's pretty amazing. So you did it in 9 months.
I was fortunate. I mean, the pivotal moment was the Stones coming to town to play the Pontiac Silverdome in a festival seating situation. And we ended up owning the show. The Stones didn't give it to us. We just took it.
Right.
But, that was probably the crescendo moment that I think kind of vaulted the radio station back into the top zone. And it stayed there. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, Marty Greenberg left. And to a great degree, I wanted to come back to New York. I mean, when I left New York to come back to Riff, of course, I never wanted to move to New York. Now I'm in New York, and I don't want to leave New York. And he said, you'll come back. You'll come back. You'll be able to come back to corporate staff. Well, he left. And so when I lost my transportation back to New York, that was the moment where, and the program director thing was eating my brain. I mean, I was doing it 24/7. I mean, it was probably not a healthy situation looking back on it. So I know I needed to make a change.
When you say eating it 24/7, what was different about being a program director versus what your research roles were prior? Did you feel just more ownership and making sure it was going to succeed?
You own it when you're the program director. You own the ratings. When you're anybody else at the radio station, you care, or in the organization or whatever, you care, but you're still dotted line. And when the books are good or the books are bad, they're at the program director's door. They're not at the marketing director's door or the research director's door. I mean, it's the program director where it all starts and stops. So, yeah, I felt an immense set of pressure and responsibility. Much easier being a research guy where you do your job, you make your recommendations. As a consultant, you help with implementation, and then you get the heck out of the way and let the program director do his or her thing. So being program director, I think, is the hardest job in the world.
Was there ever a time, so you've got that 9 months that you're basically turning it back around and going back to owning the market. Did you find that period more fun than once you got back to the top again? Or was being at the top more fun?
None of it was fun. You know, it's really sad to admit that, but none of it was fun until the job ended. And when I look back on it, I was able to take some measure of pride, but it was difficult. It was difficult doing the climb, and then it was difficult staying there. And I was lucky for the rest of the books that I was there. We were the leading rock station out of the pool, but the effort that it took to sustain it was every bit as difficult as it was to claw our way back, and it just didn't get any easier, Chachi. In fact, if anything, it got more difficult. Everybody was hungrier in the climb. And then once things settled in, it kind of begins to move into, what about me? Am I getting a raise? What about that? What about this? You know,
Sure.
And the demands on a winning radio station are just intense. I mean, you talk to guys today like Bill Weston, great example. I mean, you know, I did riff for a lousy 2 years. I mean, you know, he's done HJY and Providence and a number of other stations, but MMR, I don't even know how long Bill's been there now, but it's probably in the 15-year zone. You know, my hat is off to a guy like that who is able to bring it every year and continue to motivate a staff like that. I mean, it's really hard work.
It's physically exhausting. I completely agree with you. And it's interesting because I think amongst the people that I've interviewed, I've been very fortunate to interview some amazing programmers. I felt very similar to the way that you felt at Riff. It was when I was at K-Big and then, you know, my FM, it was incredibly stressful. And I remember just being, I don't want to say beat down, but reminded quite regularly that every 10th of a point was $1 million in revenue and how important each one of those tenths were and what it meant. And downloading those numbers every month was so incredibly stressful. And then when PPM came out, we had gotten a boost, which was great. We looked better in PPM, but now the stress was even more because now I'm getting this data every single week. And it was so nerve-wracking. And that anxiety the night before downloading those ratings, it was really kind of tough to live with in a lot of ways.
It's very hard. And when I got the ratings, it was long before PPM, of course. And it was during the phase when Arbitron would call them into the station.
Oh, interesting. How did that work?
Well, so they would literally place a call to the designated person at the station, and for a while that was me. And literally they would read you the 12 plus.
No way.
And it was in alphabetical order. So it wasn't from number 1 to number 53. It was KBC to KBX.
Right. Oh my gosh. So you're waiting till the
right. And you know, WRIF is well down the alphabet. And it got to the point where my hand would be shaking as I was writing these numbers down, and I had somebody else at the station write them down. I stood over their shoulder and watch the process go down. But no, I totally get what you're talking about. I would be a complete wreck in PPM with weekly numbers. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
No way. No way. I have so much respect for the people who are programming radio stations, and I think it's so much harder today. I mean, part of my mission was to really be the last line of defense with the salespeople, you know, to protect the brand in any way that I possibly could, and yet still find a way for the radio station to make money. But that was valued a lot more back then than it is today. Today's program directors are under immensely more pressure from a revenue generation standpoint, and to go with the flow.
And we had the tools of music directors and promotions directors, and I never had to be on air. And now so many PDs are tasked with multiple stations. They're scheduling their own music. They're doing an on-air shift. It's like, I don't know how you do it all.
I don't get it either. And the description that you just said is exactly what I had. I was off air. I had an off-air music director, an off-air APD, a promotion director, a promotion assistant. I mean, it would have been a damn shame if I didn't win with all those tools in the toolkit, right?
I'm watching a great, I guess this docudrama on Halston, the designer that was huge in the 60s and the 70s. And
McGregor, right?
Yes, Ewan McGregor plays him. And right after, I don't want to give it up, but he becomes very big, as all of us know, and he now has a corporation that owns his brand, and this pressure to produce a lot of scale, a lot of dresses, a lot of items that they can then put his name on. And he has a line in there where he just doesn't have time to create. And that's what I think has happened to the programmers of today. You and I were given the luxury that we could actually sit and think for a moment to create, whether that was a Stones promotion or whatever it was that you were doing at that particular time. I don't see how PDs are able to create any longer.
Now, the key for me, I mean, look, you know, as a program director, you walk out of the building some nights and you go, what the hell did I do today? I mean, the day flew by and I was in all these crazy meetings and stuff, and I remember thinking to myself, it may have been Alan Burns who laid this on me because he and I kind of came up, he at LS and me at Riff at the same time. But I think it may have been Alan who said to me, the key is to do something positive for the radio station every day. If you can walk out the door at night, even if it was a shitty day or it was all meetings or whatever, if you can walk out the door at night and go, okay, but we did this, and that's going to help the brand in some way, then it's a successful day. That's what I tried to do. Didn't do it on every day because you can't.
Right.
But tried to do it on most days, yeah.
I like that lesson. That's a great lesson.
Yep.
Do something every day that's going to make the station better. I really like that a lot.
Even if it's incremental.
Oh, that's great. So what makes you decide you're back at the top, and what decides you to pick up? I get the pressure, so I'm guessing that had something to do with it. But now you're still very young. You're 32, 33, and to go out and to start your own company at that age, I mean, that's a bold move in and of itself.
So I waited for a good book at Riff and then quit. I'm one of these guys. I mean, I obviously haven't had many jobs in the industry, but I'm one of these people that needs to end something before I begin the next thing. I can't start arranging the next thing while I'm still at the last thing. So I started thinking about what life after Riff and ABC might be, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't have enough bandwidth to even imagine what it would be like, and so I knew I had to go. And so I waited for the right moment to go. I mean, literally the day after the book came out, I quit, and I had sort of resigned a couple of times earlier than that, so it wasn't a complete shock that it was time to go. Credits were rolling, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to take the summer off and just sort of try and figure it out.
Do you have a family at this time, Fred? How did you...
No, I'm not married.
Okay, you're not married, and you'd saved up some money?
I saved up some money. I'm not married. I'm divorced.
Okay.
So I've got that liberated thing going on, and I've got some money, so I'm not under the gun to immediately do something else, and I'm at home.
Oh, gotcha. That's nice.
Right. Family's around, so I've got all the support that I need. And I get a call from Ed Christian, who at the time, he is now the owner of Saga Communications, but at the time was CEO of what was then Josephson Radio, which he actually did a leverage buy on, and that's what became Saga a number of years later. Believe it or not, I was Ed's student advisor at Michigan State, even though Ed knew more about radio at that time than I did. But Ed was getting a master's degree. Isn't that nuts?
No kidding. I never knew that.
Oh, it's crazy.
And he's been another phenomenal supporter. We've done the imaging for Saga now for, I guess we're probably in our 4th year, but they've been amazing to us. I had no idea you guys were connected like that.
So Ed put me in business. Ed basically came to me and said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I could go back to work for a research company. I could go back to work for a radio company. I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, well, I'll tell you what, over the summer while you're figuring it out, do research for my radio stations. You'll do it cheap. It'll keep your head in the game. It'll be good for both of us. And so I did. So I started doing work for FM 99 in Norfolk and Sunny in Columbus and where else? Milwaukee, they owned it at that point, which they still do. And so I did that throughout the summer.
What an amazing opportunity. So you're doing that basically in your bedroom at your mom's house or in at the kitchen table type
My
thing.
apartment, the kitchen table of my apartment, exactly. And I'm now beginning to actively look around and see what's going on. And the summer's winding down. And Ed is now going, hey, you'd be a schmuck to go to work for somebody else at this point. You could have your own company. I'll throw enough business at you to keep you going. I'll introduce you to people because I was terribly unconnected. I knew people inside ABC, but that was it. It was kind of a cloistered community at that point. And so Ed was very supportive. And in my other ear, my dad, who always owned his own businesses, was whispering the same thing. You know, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, if you go in business for yourself and you screw it up after a couple of years, you can go back to work and program a radio station or do research for somebody. But, you know, you're in your early 30s, and it really doesn't take a lot of capital to start a consultancy. I mean, I bought a Selectric typewriter for the dining room table, and I was off to the races, right? So it really wasn't a huge risk at that point in time, but I took right to it, and I had the right DNA with the research background, and I knew how to travel, and I knew how to work on the road, and I knew how to go in and out of important meetings with smart people. So it's not like there was a huge learning curve there. I had done all this stuff before, so it really wasn't crazy.
Did you feel more pressure as a programmer and those ratings coming down that we were just talking about that causes so much anxiety, or as a business person, entrepreneurial, making sure that, especially when you are in the early days, you're not quite sure where your next client's going to come from or if you can pay your rent or your employees? What was more stressful?
Ratings. Notice how long I had to think about that.
Yeah.
No, it was definitely the ratings. I mean, and I ended up putting pressure on myself early on with the consultancy because the development of classic rock was going on in the background at that time. I mean, Bender and I were talking to each other about the idea of a format that would be what classic rock turned out to be. I mean, I was thinking about that at Riff. I mean, we started seeing indications in our research at Riff that the audience was, I love the word bifurcating, but that's exactly what they were doing. We had the young audience who was kind of going, why are you playing all these Beatles and Stones and Who songs? And we had the older audience going, you know, I'm not enjoying Loverboy and AC/DC very much. And it was obvious we were stretching the rubber band, which is kind of what the problem at Album Rock radio station was. I mean, it was playing a really wide stretch of music and pissing people off every couple of records. So that's when I started thinking about this idea of what if there was a station that sort of started at Meet the Beatles and then kind of maybe ended with the Cars, because I wasn't sure what the hell to do with U2.
So you're thinking of this creation, and in our industry, I'm going to go as far as, I mean, it's kind of our version of Mickey Mouse. I mean, the classic rock format is obviously still to this day a juggernaut. And just before this call, we were just talking about it. We share a client in KLOS, and they're doing tremendously well in that format here in Los Angeles. So this takes you about a year based on kind of your experience at Riff and just the playlist basically being kind of extended and almost trying to serve two different demos. Am I correct in saying that is what the AOR was trying to do?
That's correct. And there was nothing I could do at Riff because Riff was fine. I mean, it was like, ooh, I think I have a cool idea, but I can't implement it here.
Right.
So it just sort of sat on the shelf. Well, meantime, I mean, I know this sounds so weirdly circuitous. So Marty Greenberg, right, the guy who was my ABC guy.
Who left and went to Dallas, right?
Goes to Dallas at Belo and takes a bunch of ABC people with him, including Tom Bender and my brother, Paul. And it's KZEW, the big album rock station. And the AM station is this loser news talk station, WFAA. And Bender and I are kind of working on the classic rock thing. And one thing leads to another. And it's like, let's see if we can talk Greenberg into taking our AM loser news talk station and flipping it into what became classic rock. And so we did.
Amazing.
And so KRQX was born, K-Rocks, in 1983. And for an AM radio station in a major market, it really shook things up. And it was cool. So I knew I was onto something. And
so you put this on the air. This is your baby, your creation, your format. There's got to be some anxiety there. Even though the station wasn't doing well in its prior format, that's still a big gamble.
There was anxiety, but we did some early focus groups. And in fact, it was in the focus groups where things began to gel. I mean, if it weren't for focus groups, classic rock, as at least I developed, it would not have happened. But I have probably done at least 500 focus groups just among classic rock listeners. So I got to know these people pretty well, plus I was one of them.
Sure.
I mean, you know, it kind of helps when you're the target audience as well. But we do our first set of focus groups at K-Rocks, and they're raving because the Zoo and Q102, the big AORs in the market, are not playing the Beatles and the Stones and Zeppelin very much anymore, and we're the only ones playing that stuff. And so the audience is very excited, and everything's great. And I finally come to the point in the focus group outline where I go, so what slogan does this station use? Well, the slogan that we decided on was Good Time Rock and Roll. And so I ask, what slogan does the station use? And they know everything about the station. They know the DJs. They know the music. They can't think of the slogan.
Really?
Can't think of it. It's that impactful. It doesn't come up in 4 focus groups. And so I start asking them, okay, obviously they're not describing the radio station the way you guys are thinking of it. How would you describe it? And the word classic started popping up. The music's classic. It's classic rock. It stood the test of time. I mean, they're kind of going through all those things. And I remember coming out of the groups and Tom and I looking at each other and going, let's call it classic rock. And there had been a few experiments in the past of stations that had called themselves classic rock but weren't playing a music diet like we were playing. So, you know, the name had kind of been flying around out there, but nobody was really doing anything with it. So we took it.
Amazing. Is there an aha moment where you're like, my God, this is working, we have success?
With the first FM, yeah. So the good news is it's working in Dallas as good as it's going to do. And I start selling it everywhere, and nobody who has an FM radio station, no matter how pathetic it is, will put classic rock on their FM station. It can't possibly work. It'll burn out in 6 months. It'll never last, all that stuff. And frankly, at the time, I'm thinking they may be right. I mean,
that's got to be kind of dejecting. It's your baby. It's your creation.
It was demoralizing. There was no question about it. And then somebody who had heard me speak at a conference in Michigan about classic rock, who was a program director of the 4th AC in Lansing on a Class A, actually licensed to Charlotte, Michigan, was at a point of desperation, remembered my speech. They called me, and we put it on WMMQ in Lansing, which, by the way, is still classic rock today.
Unbelievable.
And still kills it. But it absolutely exploded. I mean, it was scary good how well that station did. And then it started, Chachi. I mean, like lemmings going over the cliff, man. I got Kansas City, put KCFX on the air. It exploded. Got out to Los Angeles with KLSX. We had a hell of a few years there before we screwed it up, but we had a great run there. And then Chicago and Detroit and on, Washington, D.C. I mean, it was crazy how fast it grew.
What an amazing experience that had to be. Did you at this point?
It was so cool.
I bet. Are you enjoying life now? Are you kind of seeing the fruits of your success?
Yeah, I'm digging it now. I mean, it's still pressurizing because it's going to go away, it's going to burn out stuff is still floating around. Meanwhile, the record community is not real happy with me.
Oh, because you're playing, it's a gold-based format, so they're upset.
It's a gold-based format, and it's dragging the current rock stations older and less current. Oh, yeah. So I'm a bit of a pariah all of a sudden to the record guys and gals. So, I mean, there were clearly pressures, and we were going up against all the monsters, you know. I mean, KLSX was going up against KLOS and KMET, which actually signed off about a couple of months after we signed on. It might have been the final straw. Who the hell knows? But, you know, at NCX, we're going up against MMS. At CXR in Washington, we're going up against DC 101. So there was a lot of pressure because, you know, here we are trying to beat the crap out of these legendary rock stations like Riff. and I'm like, wow. And it's tough. I mean, it's sort of the little engine that could in every market.
How did you cope with, well, first, a couple questions on this, because I'm really want to know more about the creation and then also just the business aspect of it. But how did the word get out? You've got success now in Dallas and in Lansing. Are you marketing at this point, or it's just kind of word of mouth? How did people really start to put 2 and 2 together that this is Fred's creation?
I'm running ads in R&R, but I think it's, Chachi, I think it's more organic really. I mean, even though there was no internet back then, I mean, success begets success. People start talking about a radio station or start talking about a format or whatever, whether it's Hot Hits or Motown,
Jack FM or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, the industry buzzes. We hate new formats and we love new formats, right? It'll never work. It'll never work. Sign me up,
Yeah.
So, right? I can't wait to do this. I mean, I had people sign up for classic rock and they didn't even know what the hell the format was. I mean, they had no idea. They just looked at these numbers and these other markets and said, I want some of that. Get me that. We can do that here. We've got a rock station in town that's maybe a little too fat and happy. So let's go. So, yeah, it was really more organic than anything else. I mean, I did everything I could to work it.
What an incredible story. And did you have, and I'm sure this had to have been frustrating, you guys create this, you put so much time and effort and research into it. And then what about the copycats? How did you deal with that?
As best I could. I mean, I tried to actually learn from them, because I couldn't imagine at the time that there was, 12 different ways to do classic rock. But of course, we know today, I exaggerate, but there are all kinds of different versions of the format now. There's classic hits and hard classic rock. And I mean, it goes on. At the time, I wasn't thinking along those lines. So the fragmentation aspect of it was difficult. And then the other part, and this might have been the greatest screw up of my career, or maybe not, but I talked to a lawyer early on about copywriting classic rock as a phrase, and was advised it was too generic and I would never be able to own it.
I will tell you, we got the exact same advice. We work with RDub and Sunday Night Slow Jams, and we were told the exact same thing about slow jams. And RDub went ahead and submitted it, and he got it for slow jams. But an attorney told us, you'll never get it.
I know. And, years later, I service marked the edge when we started doing an alternative format, and we still own the mark today. And even though there's only a handful of edge stations left, I mean, we're still getting checks every month.
Good for you.
Yeah, but classic rock would have been the bigger win, don't you think?
Yeah, it would have been.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda, man.
It still turned out all right for
That's
you, my
all right.
friend. So you guys now are you've exploded into a new stratosphere. At this point, is this when you hire Paul and Bill to come and work with you?
Yeah, Bill first, then Paul. At this point now, we're doing classic rock, we're doing alternative, and we're doing mainstream rock. So we're kind of working to become the rock consultancy of record. It's not easy. There's some great competitors out there, and Pollock and Demers, and Sebastian was still floating around. I think Dwight was still consulting for the Burkhart Douglas organization. So it was a very crowded atmosphere landscape for a lot of years. But that was the goal, was to try and be the dominant consultancy. And I think we got there. They don't give awards for that. Yeah. So, I mean, who the heck knows, right?
I think the induction in the Radio Hall of Fame says enough. You absolutely got there, my friend. Yeah. Obviously, you guys own rock. You've created the classic rock format, Edge. How does it come to be that now television comes knocking on your door? MTV, VH1?
Just kind of contacts and happenstance and word of mouth, right? Steve Goldstein, who I've been friends with since the beginning of time. I mean, we knew each other from the old ABC days. He moves to Detroit right when I quit Riff. Steve comes to work for them, and I go, where are you living? And he says, Farmington Hills. I said, I live in Farmington Hills. Where? And he says, Hunters Ridge. And I said, Steve, I live in Hunters Ridge. He said, get out of here. He says, no. I mean, we're in the same complex. What building number are you? Next door to mine.
No way.
Steve and I become fast friends.
You're knocking on the wall and you can hear each other.
He goes on to become the group programmer for Saga. It's all weirdly connected here. And he introduces me to his old college buddy, Steve Seidman, who is the research director for MTV.
Wow.
And basically, hey, Fred does great focus groups. Fred does great research. Steve gives me an opportunity to do it. And they like me, and then that begins to open up all kinds of other doors. So VH1 follows. We start working for Playboy. That's another entire interview. You can only imagine
sure,
a Playboy focus group, Chachi. Think about that.
That sounds like a real rough gig. I feel for you.
You can only imagine some of the questions you have to ask these guys, but I'll hold them for another day. But yeah, it begins to open up a whole new world for us. And then we start doing research again. That was the other turning point, because I had pretty much stopped doing research, and at that point was just consulting and a few focus groups here and there, but for the most part, that was it.
And I mean, as you're consulting, but when you're putting these formats on, you're almost acting, and correct me if I'm wrong, almost like a group program director to some degree. I mean, you're pretty involved in helping them everything from their branding to their playlists. I mean, I'm guessing you've got your sleeves rolled up and you're working hard at each one of these stations.
Well, and one of the secret sauces is my brother Paul, because the whole calculus of bringing him into the company is, and it took me a while to understand this, but he convinced me correctly that just helping radio stations get ratings is only half the battle. Converting those ratings into sales and revenue is the rest of the battle. And so when you think that most of these radio stations were something else, right? We flip an AC to classic rock. We flip a country station to alternative. I mean, if we're right programmatically, we're going to get ratings, but these poor salespeople are sitting there and they're lost. I mean, deer in the headlights, don't know what to do. Who do we call on? I don't really get the format. Paul goes in, experienced sales manager, general manager, sits down with the sales staff and says, okay, here's the deal. Here's the audience. Here's what they buy. Here's how they think. Here's who to call on. I'll make sales calls with you. I'll do advertiser lunches. So that was the secret sauce.
Man, that's brilliant. I did not realize you did that. That's absolutely brilliant. So it was a soup to nuts type solution for, I could see now you're going into an owner or a general manager going, how could you not take this package? You've got the great ratings and you've got a built-in now sales consultant and the expertise to help your AEs.
Full service. And then I hire a digital guy before we know what digital is, Tim Davis, who sadly is no longer with us, joined as a junior consultant. God, I need to be careful what I say about him. He's no longer here. He was not a great consultant, Chachi. I mean, some people can do this and have a great bedside manner, and that was not Tim.
Okay.
What Tim was great at was websites and email databases and understanding the digital dot connecting that ultimately we ended up doing. And Paul and I didn't quite understand what he was talking about all the time, but we recognized the fact that he got it. And he was the one who really turned us on to the idea of developing mobile apps. I mean, that was Tim.
And you guys were ahead of that by, it seemed like, eons. I mean, you basically launched in tandem with Apple when apps, I mean, it was within weeks, correct?
Yeah, about 100 days after the Apple Store opened, we launched Jake Apps. Tim had come to us, and remember what was going on. This is 2008. I mean, the economy is cratering. The radio industry is cratering right along with it. We're losing clients. I mean, it's getting a little scary out there. And Tim walks into the conference room holding up his new iPhone and says, look at what I just discovered. Here's an app for a public radio station in Rhode Island that streams. And I'm like, who cares? Why is that important? And he said, well, because there are no Walkmans anymore, Fred. Radio is no longer portable, even though everybody in radio thinks it is. But no one carries a radio around anymore. But soon we're all going to have smartphones. And these apps could be the way that radio could be heard on phones. And I mean, he was right. I sent him out to try and figure out a way to license the code from the company that was doing this. We did that. And we started developing apps. And we didn't know what the hell we were doing. I mean, I'm as much a software guy as anybody in radio, which is not at all. And we started a mobile app company in 2008 that has now developed north of 1,300 apps on both the iOS and Android platforms. Crazy.
That's incredible, man. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Tim, it sounds like, was a savant. He saw or could kind of see the tea leaves, read the tea leaves, and knew what was happening.
He was a savant and a great guy, a really hard worker, just came at it from a very different angle. And I think Paul and I recognized his skill set. I mean, even near the end, I mean, he was coming to us and going, "Are you sure there's a place for me in the company? I mean, I don't really understand how I fit." And I'd go, "You fit just fine. Don't worry about it." But, you know, he thought he needed an assigned group of stations so that he could see his ROI to the company. And I go, "Man, your ROI to the company is your presence here. It has nothing to do with how many call letters are dangling from your belt." So, yeah, it took a while to convince him, but he was great.
How does the tech surveys, how did that come to be? And by the way, thank you for doing those. I mean, they're just incredible and a highlight for me every year. And I learn so much every time you release one. It's really, I think, become kind of the gold standard of what's happening in the industry.
I appreciate that. So it's part of this digital thing in the late 90s. We are encouraging our radio stations to aggregate email databases. You may remember stations used to have regular mail databases. That was a cluster, right?
And expensive.
Really. I mean, like a station like KBIG might have 40, 50,000 names, but the problem is every time you mail out a piece, it costs you thousands.
We'd spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on direct mail.
So email comes along, and I start looking at it and going, whoa, you know what? We can use email for more than just email blasts about our weekend promotions or sales coupons. And so we begin to start using email databases as a research tool. And Buzz Knight and I, he's working for ZLX. We hire a new morning show at ZLX in Boston. And so you know the drill. You hire a new morning show, and you really don't find out for what? 2 to 3 books, what's actually going on with the show and what's working and what's not. And so I write a questionnaire. We serve it to the ZLX database, and in 48 hours, we've got 700 surveys back talking about the new morning show. What do they like? What don't they like? What features are sticking? All that kind of stuff. And so now I'm beginning to start doing these things, and then 9/11 happens. What people don't remember about 9/11, it was the beginning of the fall book. And everybody had billboards booked and TV booked. This was back when everybody was marketing like crazy, direct mail booked. And I'm hearing from all of our clients, all of our rock stations going, hey, what do we do? I mean, is it okay to be funny in the morning? Can we do contests? I mean, what's appropriate? And of course, no one knew what was appropriate because nobody had ever been through 9/11. And so we pulled together our first group study, and I think something like 45 radio stations, rock stations, alternative stations, classic rock stations participate. And again, in just a couple of days, we've got 20,000 completed interviews from radio stations all over the country talking about how the audience talking about how they're feeling and what's going on and how the station is doing and what they want to hear at this moment. So the light bulbs now are going off, and I'm thinking there's a there to doing these big group studies. And so in 2004, with all the tech stuff going on in radio, I'm really feeling that a lot of the people that we're consulting are just not seeing the digital thing. Radio is so myopic at this point. Everybody's looking at streaming and saying, oh, it's a nothing and you can't make any money from it, and nobody does it. And podcasts are fledgling at this point, and social media really doesn't exist. But I'm looking at digital and going, man, this is the future, and the radio listening audience has got to be doing some of this stuff, so let's find out. And so we start doing our first tech poll, as they were called back then, and they were only rock stations that participated. I couldn't figure out how to get the other formats involved. Joel Denver was the guy who literally pushed me into opening tech survey up to all formats. Had it not been for him, might not have happened.
Oh, interesting. Is that why you present at the radio summit or the audio summit every year?
Exactly. And one thing led to the other. Okay, I'll help you get the word out on tech survey if you come and present the study to my conference. So
Joel was very instrumental in our Iron Imager contest, and that's where we birthed that officially at the very first radio summit. So he's been an amazing
Joel
partner.
A great friend? I mean, look, this is a guy who just loves radio, but I think sees the potential in people like you and people like me and people like Lori Lewis. I mean, you know, when you look at all the people that not so much Joel discovered, but Joel kind of figures out how to put you in a position to win.
Yeah, he's a connector, and he's a mensch. He's a very good man.
He really is, and he's a great friend. And so, yeah, Joel pushed us into this, and so we started doing these tech surveys every year, and then a few years later, we have a companion survey for public radio. We started working for public radio anyway, and we're consulting NPR and a bunch of stations, and so one thing really led to the other. I mean, we already were developing a footprint in public radio, and I thought, why don't we become the research piece? And we did.
I think A, it's a brilliant move from a marketing perspective, but B, and more importantly, the information that you share is, I think, so valuable. And I know that's got to be a very expensive project for you guys to do every year, but thank you for doing that and giving it to the industry too.
Well, look, we benefit as well. You know, I mean, it gives me a pulpit. It gives me data. I mean, nobody uses data better than me. I have faults, God knows. There are areas that I don't do really well, and I've tried to hire to those weaknesses over the years and bring people with skills that I didn't have. But my superpower, if there is such a thing as my ability to be able to look at data and translate it into programming and marketing and brand building. And so that data helps me so much. I mean, it helps hundreds of, we had, I think, 470 radio stations participate in Tech Survey this year. So they're all getting benefit for their brands, but collectively, the stuff I'm learning and my staff is learning along the way is really invaluable. So, you know, it's been a win-win all the way through with Tech Survey, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's been an eye-opener.
It's a great just research piece, and thank you again for doing that. A couple more questions for you. So you work with two of your brothers. I, too, actually used to work with my brother. He left a few years ago and went to become a therapist, but he still owns a small piece of the company. And there would be times where we did not see eye to eye, and I can actually think of a Christmas where we were not speaking to each other, and we had a hard time kind of letting business be business, and it would cross over into our personal and our family lives. Has that ever happened between you and your brothers?
A little bit, but not much. Once I think everybody sort of did their role, it took me a while. Bill and I had some moments in the early years. I was not a real good listener to what he wanted to do and kind of had my own idea of how he should be. And when I finally actually started hearing him instead of blathering away about what I wanted it to be, it worked out better. With Paul and I, it's been a great marriage from the beginning. I mean, Lori Lewis tells a great story. Her office was right between ours. And every once in a while, Paul and I will have words, and it can get vocal, and there can be a little huffing and puffing when, you know, one goes back into his office. But usually about an hour later, one of us walks into the other's office and says, "Where do you want to have lunch today?"
That's great.
And it's over. It's absolutely over. And I remember Lori saying to me, "How do you guys do that? I mean, how is it possible to passionately scream at each other about something philosophical that you both care about, and then an hour later you're eating corned beef sandwiches at Star Deli? I mean, how does that work?" And that's exactly how it works. So, yeah, Paul and I have had our little moments, but they've never leaked into the family at all. And I mean, here's a funny story. A number of years ago, we were advised to get Keyman Insurance. Do you know how that works?
Yeah, sure. I'll set that up really quick. So basically, a Keyman Insurance is if, God forbid, something happens to Fred or to Paul, it's basically an insurance policy. We have them here, and that insurance policy has a payout. So it's like a life insurance policy, but for executives or partners in a business.
And their families, right. So we're sitting with the CPA and the lawyer, and we're kind of walking through how this is going to work. And the lawyer turns to us and said, "Well, have you guys given any thought to what each of you would do if something happened to the other?" And we each said at the same time, we'd fold the company. I mean, I don't want to do it without him. and he doesn't want to do it without me. And sadly, something's going to happen at some point down the road, and one of us is going to have a decision to make. But right now, today, he's my partner. He's my best friend. I mean, he understands me better than anybody, excepting perhaps my wife and kids. And so, it's a great situation to be in, Chachi, to have somebody like that who cares about you and the business as much as you care, and your family and everything else. It's great.
No, I absolutely admire that so much, and that story that you were just sharing about getting into the arguments, but then going to be able to get lunch together. I think that is key. It's not the argument. And by the way, let me back up. This is what I didn't understand a decade ago with my brother. It's not the argument. It's how you recover from the argument and not taking it personal, being able to set the two things aside. And we're not always going to agree. And a lot of ways, it's probably on a much bigger macro level. It might be wrong with our country right now that we're taking so many things personal, as opposed to just saying, hey, we're not always going to agree on everything. We're going to have the same goals. We all want what's best for the radio station or for the country, but sometimes we believe in different paths to get from point A to point B, and that's okay.
Well, it's hard, and we're passionate people, and we're people who are paid to be right.
Yeah.
And when you're paid to be right about a lot of stuff, you actually believe that you are right about most things, even though you may not be. Right? And so, I mean, when he and I go at it, and it's pretty infrequent. And, we've been through it all together. I mean, we've been through these formats. We've been through the loss of employees. We went through 08, 09 and got through that. We're gutting COVID out. We'll get through that. I mean, there's been a lot of really difficult chapters, and I think we kind of lean on that survival instinct and the fact that we've done this, we can do that. And we don't get mired in the disagreements for too very long. I mean, neither of us are kids. Life is too short. There are certain things worth getting aggravated about. This is what I never understood programming riff. I'd be a much better program director today than I was when I was 30, at least from a mental health standpoint.
Yeah. I can tell that you are incredibly, your humility is I'm very impressed by that. And just being able to be retrospective and say that, especially with someone with your success and who has made so many right decisions and has gone on to accomplish so much. And I think not all people evolve and develop into what you have become. And to say, you know what, yeah, I do make mistakes, and I've made them, and I've learned a lot from them, and it's a large reason, for my success. And I think when we're younger, we just think that A, we're bulletproof, and B, we get so thick-headed that we have to be right, and we somehow tie that into our ego, that being right is part of our ego, and I don't know what that is, but I've noticed that with my older age, that I hope that I'm becoming more humble as I get older.
Well, I think you literally and figuratively become more gray. I mean, when you're young, it's a black and white everything. We're going to play that or we're not. We're going to be that or we're not. We're going to support that or we're not. And then, you get older and you turn gray, or, you don't have much left.
Exactly.
But you tend to start seeing things from both sides. And I think you're right. I mean, with the country being in the shape that it's in, I mean, there's no question that neither side is listening to the other very well at this point. There's not a lot of empathy out there, and empathy is just a tremendous quality. And I mean, that's what I try to be focused on now. I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing with you. I mean, I hear from a lot of people in the business who are disenchanted or out of work or really in just a bad state. And I do what I can to try and acknowledge them and hear them. And I can't help them all. I mean, some people are either beyond that, or they won't help themselves, or the drill. But that empathy is so important, because we all remember when nobody would return our resume and cover letters. And so I really try hard to respond to everybody.
Good for you, man. I think that's such an impressive quality, and I need to do a better job at that because you're.
Oh, I do too, man. Believe me, there's people out there going, "Oh yeah, well then how come you didn't?" But I think about that a lot. John Guerin taught me that. I mean, John Guerin. I mean, what an amazing dude. I mean, you know, a guy who is so accomplished. And when John was programming LS, I mean, everybody got a personal note back who
sent in an air check
for a job. Yep. John told the story. Dan Mason, you know, who went on to become John Guerin's boss, actually had a copy of the rejection letter from John Guerin, the personal note from John.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, that stuff means a lot.
Yeah, it does. Know? You're 100% right. We do need to do a better job as an industry treating our own and taking care of our own in this industry, because we've got so many outside forces that are competing against us and trying to take us down, and you know, from a business perspective. And so to battle from within just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's a large part of it, is treating people better, our own colleagues. You've been an incredibly accomplished program director, and obviously, you know, at Riff in particular, the one and only station that you programmed. But if you're going to pick one, that's a damn good one to do. By the way, before I ask you this last question, I congratulations to Scott Jameson, who's done a great job, I think, with the station. Do you still listen quite a bit?
Oh, I do. I consult them. And that's the crazy part, is that I've been consulting them for pretty much most of the time that I've been gone. So I'm still, thank God, connected to them from Greater Media through Beasley.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Just an honor to, you know, they brought me in for the 50th anniversary a couple of months ago, which was really nice. And so Scott's done a tremendous job, especially moving to a market like Detroit in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. Good point.
Right. I mean, it's hard enough to do this job as it is, and yet to actually land in Detroit, Michigan during a lockdown, and the radio station is, for all intents and purposes, empty. I mean, he has so understood in a short order what it means to program in Detroit and what it means to program the Riff brand. And, you know, he's also responsible for CSX and the other stations in the cluster. I mean, it's not just Riff like it was for me, the easy job, right?
He's got a lot on his plate, but he's a fantastic programmer, and got a tremendous amount of respect for him. I think he did amazing work in Minneapolis. And then I'm also a big fan of Beasley and Justin, and I think they're great broadcasters. And so I'm happy to see him there.
They've done a heck of a job. I mean, you know, buying those greater media markets. I mean, you know, hats off to Peter Smyth and Buzz Knight and the Bordis family. I mean, they grew a great company, and the Beasleys have taken it over, and they haven't missed a beat, you know.
I agree.
And that's really hard to do, especially in this environment. So I'm thankful to still, you know, occasionally they ask my opinion at Riff, and of course I give it to them. And so, yeah, it's good.
Hats off to you. I know they just had an amazing book, so congratulations. My last question. So you've been a programmer, a researcher, and a consultant, and wildly successful at all three. Out of those three, what is your favorite to do?
Consultant. Yeah. We kind of missed a step. I taught for a couple of years. As I got my master's degree at State, I couldn't get hired for a real job, and so I taught for a couple of years at State.
This is before you went to Magid.
Yep. But the reason I bring it up is that I really enjoyed it. It was really a lot of fun. And it dawned on me not too far into the consulting thing that being a good consultant is like being a good teacher or an instructor. I mean, you're taking knowledge that you have and your ability to be able to analyze and see things and pass it on to others. And, you know, every time I do a tech survey presentation or some other kind of PowerPoint thing, I mean, it's a lecture, Chachi. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, it's the same drill. So the answer to the question is consultant, but the real answer is teacher.
That's a great answer. And you saying that, and I'm really glad you brought this up. So I'm going to help teach in the fall semester at Clark University in Atlanta, a radio broadcast class, and I'm really excited. I'll just be helping. There's a professor and a professional involved, but we've volunteered through the Library of American Broadcasting Foundation at the University of Maryland, and actually through Heidi Raphael, who's the from Beasley, who's the chairman of that board, and I'm on the board, and so we're going to be doing a radio broadcasting and podcasting class.
You're going to love it. I mean, it'll be invigorating, and I do everything I can to get back doing speaking gigs for high school and college courses, because at this point, instead of us telling them what the real world of radio is, I tend to look at them and go, what are you doing? What are you listening to and watching, and why? And we've got a lot to do here with Gen Z, man. So that's good that you'll be more connected to them. That's a good thing.
I'll be coming to you for some advice, my friend. Yeah, that's going to be
this anything you need. I'll show them PowerPoint slides and bore them to death. It'll be good.
Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been just a total pleasure. At some point, I would love just to bend your ear, and we'll do a whole other episode just on what's happening today in the industry. But it's been so much fun to learn about your past and how you got to where you are today. Congrats on all your success.
Well, thank you again for doing this. I didn't know what a great interviewer you are. And I have to tell you, there were a couple of questions and a couple of moments in the interview, and you know where they were, where you got right down to the bone marrow, and most people can't do that. So it was cool. I mean, you made me think about some stuff that I hadn't thought about for a while, and I think you got to the nut of a lot of it. So thank you. This was a fun process for me too.
Oh, that means so much coming from you, man. Thank you.